now.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's feeling good. We are starting with the Circular Plastics Conference, the second session, and this will be the session on regulatory needs and developments. Welcome, everybody. We have very good weather here in the Netherlands. I hope everybody is also enjoying that wherever you are. During this session, we ask that you put your questions in the Q&A, which you can see on the screen. And after the session, we will have a network session, and we will also address that at the end of this session. In that network session, we will have some rooms, virtual rooms, where you can also speak with the speakers. You also can stay and connect in the network app where you are currently in as a participant, and there you can chat with persons. You can schedule a meeting. You can also participate in this in these network possibilities in the virtual rooms. There is also an exhibition which we have in this network app, so you can also visit the exhibition floor and look for the companies there. Yes, thank you. I hope we can start now with the small video, and I hope everybody will be able to see this. I don't hear the sound of this. So for some reason, something is not going right. But anyway, in this video, we try to say that as DPI and ISPT, we feel the need, together with our partners, to do something in relation to circular plastics, because this is a topic of concern, and within our network of partners, we try to work on this in projects, and also this conference is trying to set up a community in relation to circular plastics, and this should be the start of it. By the way, my name is Ronald Costanje. I work for DPI, and together with ISPT, I'm the program director of this initiative. So maybe we could go through the next part of this session. So leave the introduction as it is. And then I would like to give the floor to Juan-Manuel Bañez Romero, who is the moderator of this session. And so he will guide us through the presentations and have the discussions with our presenters.
Thank you, Ronald. Good afternoon, everyone. As Ronald said, thank you very much for choosing to participate at this session about the regulatory needs and development from the Circular Plastic Conference. My name is Juan-Manuel Bañez. I am the Sustainability Advocacy Lead at Amcor for the EMEA region, and I have been dedicated the last period of my career to understand and navigate the complex environmental regulatory landscape in Europe, with a special focus on circular economy and plastics. This afternoon, we have a great panel to discuss an important topic, the role of regulation in the complex journey to complete the full circularity of plastic, as Ronald mentioned. And before giving the floor to the real protagonists of the session, let me tell you some words about their impressive background. We have Silvia Freni Sterrantino. She works as a EU Regulatory Affairs Manager at the European Plastic Converters, EuPC. Before joining the EuPC, she was working as an attorney in European law firms for the European Commission in DG competition. She studied law at the University of Siena, Cambridge, and London, where she got a master in competition law and IP at the London School of Economics. We also have Erwin Annys. He's the head of support and enforcement at the European Chemical Agency, ECHA. He has been called the Yoda of chemical regulation. And before his time at ECHA, he worked at the European Chemical Industry Council, CEFIC. Finally, we have Gerard Haagh. He works as product manager of food contact material at Triskelion. He has a strong analytical skills that has taken him through research and development in positions of food, glass, and plastic industry to the field of regulatory affairs, where he has expertise today. So, with that being said, I'm delighted to give the floor to the first speaker, Silvia Freni. So, Sylvia, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for this kind introduction and for inviting me to this conference. So today I'm going to talk you through what are the developments that we expect from European regulation when it comes to packaging. So I'll just spend a few words to explain you what is EuPC. So next, please. It's the Federation of European Plastics Converters in Europe. We are a big family. We cover different market sectors, in particular packaging, building and construction, automotive and transport, and technical parts. And indeed, we are very proud to represent a big sector, which comprises more than 50,000 companies, most of which are SMEs. And in terms, of course, of employees and turnover, we represent the biggest part of the plastics industry. Next, please. Family-wise, the federation is comprised of 46 associations. Half of them, or more or less half of them, are national plastics associations that you can see here in the map. We cover, of course, not only Europe. We don't stick to Europe as for the EU, but we also cover other European regions. And then we have 18 European sectorial associations that cover different specific converting applications. And we are also partners of important polymers value chains that you can see on the bottom of the slide. For example, vinyl plastic dedicated to PVC, PETCOR for PET, and PSEP for polyolefins. So to get into the realm of the developments, next, please. I wanted to tell you a little bit more of also the background. So what happened in European policies and why we are now facing the developments that I'm going to tell you about. Some of you probably are already familiar with the famous quote coming from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation from 2017, but that by 2050 we're going to have more plastics and fish in the oceans. And I have to tell you that still today, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation tends to be a trendsetter when it comes to topics related to plastics and to packaging in particular. And in fact, in 2018, the foundation released a document dedicated only to packaging, presenting how the future should look like when it comes to the circular economy of this type of application. So you see in the figure in the slide that the idea is indeed to push and to read circular economy as more recycling. Then the idea is to to increase reusability, but also to change and redesign through innovation, and meaning also by choices of polymers and application, the packaging sector. So as said, this is still quite strong as a background. Next, please. In fact, when last year the Ellen MacArthur Foundation released an update, a progress report of what has been done, which I actually encourage to read, because indeed it's a good summary of what the different brand owners, but also national, also member states have been doing when it comes to plastics. So thinking of all the different national plastic pacts that have been popping around. But you see indeed that still recycled content is one of the major trend for packaging, and it's increased, of course, but also the idea to shift the packaging production into a certain direction, particularly by eliminating certain types of so-called problematic or unnecessary polymers, such as polystyrene or PVC, or certain types of specific application, meaning single-use plastics. And also the idea that there should be more reusability and more reuse models, for example, via deposit schemes, deposit return schemes, but also more measurement and transparency in the sector. So I guess this background, next please, we can see and have a look at what the Commission has been doing as the major authority when it comes to European regulation. Here, just quickly, you have a little bit of an evolution of the most important documents, starting from the Circular Economy Package of 2015 and getting now to the latest baby, which is the Circular Economy Action Plan, which somehow confirms what was already in the previous documents, such as the SUP directive of the plastic strategy. Next, please. And so the SUP directive, of course, has been a little bit of a shock for the industry, in the sense that we expected some changes, but we still are going through the understanding of the real boundaries of this directive. In fact, the directive, as those of you that are more familiar with it know, that it comes with different implementing acts. And I would like to concentrate on two acts that are particularly relevant. One is the guidelines on the definition. So there are many concepts and definitions and legal words that have never appeared before in the packaging European policy, and that need a reply. So we are still waiting for this document, which was expected to be released in July 2020, and now it's probably going to be published in 2021, for example, on what is meant by single use, what is meant by reusable, and so what is the consequence for other types of plastics, not only for fossil-based plastics. And another new entry is a product requirement in the directive, which is the mandatory recycled content for beverage bottles. So the law again, so the directive again says it's somehow abstract, because we don't know how to calculate, how to report this amount. And this is, of course, is very much linked with the circular economy, with the Circular Plastics Alliance, which is this initiative of the European Commission to reach 10 million tons of recyclates into new European products by 2025. Next, please. And so also this is linked to the current packaging directive review. This is something, it's an heritage from the plastic strategy of 2018. It has been confirmed in the Circular Economy Action Plan, so the one of 2020. And again, there is a strong attention of the policymakers towards packaging. And again, the confirmation of those concepts that we saw already in 2015, such as reuse, increasing reuse and recyclability, reducing the complexity of packaging material, but also reducing overpackaging and in general packaging waste, and the correct separation of packaging, so not only plastics, of course, but also other materials at source, and the provision of mandatory recycled content for new plastics packaging, which again, it's a possibility, in the sense we still, as of today, we don't know if this is going to happen, but today the European Commission is studying together with a consultant whether this is something feasible. So in addition to those that I mentioned, so do these new product requirements included in the SUP directive. Next, please. So to conclude, because the time is quite limited, of course, this is also very much linked with the Circular Plastics Alliance, and is based on the famous pledge campaign of 2018-19 that the Commission launched, again, to increase the participation of brand owners and the different partners and actors of the value chain to increase recycled content. And the reason why we have now this call of the famous 10 million is because when the pledge campaign was analyzed, it was evident there was a gap between, you can see in the chart, between the presence and therefore the demand of recycled plastics, which is at 6.4 million tons, and the supply, which was well above 10 million, but it was at 11 million. Therefore, to reduce this gap and to ensure that there was a matching between demand and supply, the Circular Plastics Alliance has been created, has been launched. Next, please. And so I'm sure some of you have been following and part of the alliance, which is a living organism in the sense that it's meant for the industry and for public and private partners to work together. Next, please. So you can see what are the 5 topics that today the Alliance is working on. In particular, you see, so there are collection and sorting of plastics waste, product design for recycling, recycled content, which is still quite of a strong driver, together with R&D and investments, including chemical recycling, and as said, linked with the need for transparency and measurement of recycled plastics, the monitoring of its use and application in the European market. So that's really a condensed review of what is happening, what is relevant for packaging today. Thank you for your attention. I'm all ears if you have questions.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you. Really good overview of what is happening in the EU space on this packaging sustainability aspect. We have, with the help of Ronald, probably you can help me to see if there is any question from the audience. We first has a poll to run for the audience. I don't know if you can, if I can help to.
At this moment, there are no questions yet. Okay. But first, so we can go to the poll first.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
Well, the poll, if I can add a few words on the poll, it's pretty much linked on this call, as said, on mandatory recycled content, which might be a reality in the years to come for packaging. We as converters, of course, we tend to see this as could be a limit in the sense that today we already have problems when it comes to retrieve the necessary quantity and quality. And of course, if this becomes law, things are not getting easier. So I would like to know from the audience how they see that the match of demand and supply for recyclates in the European market can happen.
Indeed, very good question. I guess that the timing for the poll it's open now. We can get the audience happy to participate, so that we can get and how that's the way of we have now in the screen, the way that we can participate in that poll.
Yeah, so the link to the poll is also in the Q&A for this live event. So there you can click on it and then you directly get to the poll.
Okay, so I think while people respond, I mean, there is a clear, I don't know how many people have responded so far, but we see the exemptions from plastic tax or any other financial burdens as one of the possibility. We also see how recycling will cost more, and only those willing to absorb the extra can be one of the options, but it clearly shows the majority so far is going in the direction of the last option. While while we finish with that poll, I just had a question for you, Sylvia. If you talk about the part of the legislation, the packaging waste directive and the recycled content, what would be a desirable outcome from the EuPC from this review? What would be the ideal scenario coming out of that review in terms of the mandatory recycled content that, as you said, is very problematic and relevant at the same time for the industry?
Yes, well, indeed, what we expect as EuPC is to have and to see a packaging directive that takes into consideration not only recycled content, but also looks at circularity and sustainability through other means, in the sense that there is a packaging or there are certain characteristics for a reason. and different packaging deserve to be there. And so not necessarily recycled content, which can increase, for example, weight, might be the solution for all types of packaging. Having said that, if we get to mandatory recycled content, we definitely would like to see public authorities more involved so they understand what it means to purchase recycled content products and recyclates in general. Definitely via green public procurement engagement. So have them also lead the example and be the first buyers of recyclates and recycled content products.
Perfect. Thank you, Sylvia. So Ronald, if we don't have any other questions from the audience, we can move. So before doing that, if you can confirm that there is no question.
Currently, there are no questions from the audience.
Okay, good. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sylvia. We are now going to move to Erwin. So please, Erwin, the floor is yours.
Erwin, you're on mute.
Erwin, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah. First of all, congratulations to the organizer to organize this circular plastics conference. I think the timing is marvelous. On top, you're in the Netherlands. My very first experience with something which was more or less in relationship to this was a publication from 1975, which was called Het Kringloophuis, which you can translate as the circular house. So it's something which is clearly present for a long time already, but has now been taking much more interest. In the next slide, I think you can see that the commission that we have actually in place is clearly one of the most ambitious commissions that we got for very, very long years, and everything started with the announcement and the publication of the European Green Deal, which is looking to tackle more or less every imaginable problem that we are confronted with, not only in the European, but also worldwide. Of major attention for the discussion of today, I think it's clearly mobilizing industry for a clean and circular economy, but as well the zero pollution ambition for a toxic-free environment. And to a certain extent, I should also like to draw your attention to the From Farm to Fork, which will have a look at the packaging of food, which is playing a crucial role as well, and where you know that the plastics are playing an utmost important role into that. In the next slide, I go a little bit more in detail of what the Commission has in mind with this zero pollution strategy, which is now called the Chemicals Strategy for Sustainability, in which they envisage to go by 2030 towards a so-called toxic-free environment, and where you will see quite some important trends. It's about design of safe and sustainable chemicals. It's minimizing and controlling the exposure, and ultimately eliminating and remediating certain substances which are there. In the next slide, I come up with an overview of what are the most important publications that we have so far. So the Green Deal was published the 11th of December, more or less 3 months after the real start of the Commission, the new Commission Ursula von der Leyen. They launched the new Circular Economy Action Plan in March of last year, which was 5 years after The first package that we've seen and that Sylvia has been showing in her presentation on the circular economy. And since the end of last year, we have also a much better view of what will be covered by the chemicals strategy for sustainability. All these documents are still high-level documents which will require a lot of additional work in which the Commission is engaged together with agencies, authorities, in order to come up with much more explanations on what is really meant with the high-level messages in these documents. On the next slide, you will see what we can expect, what will need further clarification. There is, first of all, this so-called safe and sustainable by design criteria, which have to be developed. It has been talked and discussed already quite some time. Now they really kicked off within the Commission with the dedicated working group, which is clarifying what is really meant by this safe and sustainable by design. The second is as important, essentially for polymer industry, because there you will have the discussion on essential use, and the Commission is describing in the chemical strategy that for certain substances, they want to ban every use except the essential use. Coming back to polymers, thinking about the perfluorinated substances, and the PFAS are explicitly mentioned in the chemicals strategy. That's where you will indeed understand very quickly how important it will be to understand what is coming out of this discussion, what is an essential use. Also to be clarified is what is the concept which was launched for the very first time in 2015, substances of concern. You know that under the REACH regulation, we have substances of very high concern, where you have 6 different categories, and you know the processes in order to identify substances like that. Here we are talking about substances of concern, and in the strategy they describe it as being composed of substances of very high concern and other relevant substances, in particular those with chronic effect and substances posing technical problems for recovery operations. I think I'm not the only one in the world which is not 100% sure what will be covered by this definition. So this will need further clarification, but it's very clear that substances of concern is going further than what we have as information in the ECHA SCIP database, which is only looking at substances of very high concern. There's also the new concept of this product passport, where a lot of ideas are floating, but for the moment no one has really an idea how far can this go, to what extent will this be linked to artificial intelligence, blockchain, a lot of question marks which are there. So if we go then to the next slide, then we can say that there are things that we are clearly knowing already for sure. There is indeed the candidate list in REACH of the substances of very high concern, of which you know that the ultimate objective is that they will be substituted, and they are linked to the process which is called authorization. We have also the restrictions which are described in Annex 17 of REACH, which are giving now more than 70 different entries of certain substances which are not allowed in certain materials, certain applications. Many of them will have an influence if we are talking about recycling. It's clear what is not wanted to be in virgin material, will ultimately also not be wanted to be part of the circular economy. The whole discussion will be what will be the deadlines that are needed to achieve this. And another certainty that we have within the European Chemicals Agency, we have been establishing EuCLEF, this European Chemicals Legislation Finder, which is next to REACH and CLP, also covering additional restrictions related to the presence of chemicals in certain products and which are linked to 40 other different legislations. That's something that we have and that will also clearly play a role in the circular economy discussion, knowing, for instance, that the restrictions that we have under REACH can be stronger if we look at the restrictions that we can have under the Toys Directive, where also the so-called CMR substance category 2 are not allowed. And then the next slide, there remains a lot of topics where we are having major question marks. How far will this go? What will be the impact? The Commission has been surprising, I think, many people by bringing in the linkage to climate neutrality by 2050, and hence this will clearly be linked to the whole discussion of chemical recycling and how do we look at the energy consumption in a total concept. Question also on what has the Commission in mind if they are talking about tracking of substances in the supply chain, substances of concern, which will be important not only for the mechanical recycling, but it will be as important for chemical recycling, as we can expect that chemical recycling will, in the vast majority of cases, using catalysts, and we all know that more or less every catalyst can be poisoned by certain substances. So there will be a natural interest in having a way to find out what is present and what not. And then coming back to the real reality, ultimately we are talking about supply chain communication, products which are sold to people like you and me, which will at a certain moment throw away things. A rupture of communication, and how will we look at it under the circular economy. And in the next slide, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Erwin. Thank you very much. It's really interesting. I can hear myself with echo. I don't know if that is the same for everyone. But anyway, let's go for the poll. So if we can go to the poll before going to the Q&A and see if there is any question. So here is the question that Erwin shared with us, and the 4 options that we would like to discuss with you all. So happy to see your result. And in the meantime, while the result are coming, Erwin, I had a question. So how are you working with Efsa and other EU environmental agencies to bring together a robust framework for the recycled content that you have mentioned as well? So I guess the communication is very fluid and intense, but you know, we are all pretty much concerned about this recycled content mandatory requirement now. So it would be good to get your view on that and an opinion, basically.
Yes, thanks for the question, Juan-Manuel. We got already quite some intense contacts with Efsa in the past. We have been working together on endocrine disruptors. ECHA is looking at the harmonized classification and labeling of pesticides. So there we have also quite some interactions that will be clearly amplified in the discussion on circular economy and also for the chemical strategy for sustainability, in which the Commission has been introducing the concept of one substance, one assessment, where we discuss intensively with Efsa on how to look at this, because that's where we have probably the most natural synergy. We are, of course, also in contact with EMA, the Medicines Agency, essentially related to another actuality, the COVID-19 situation, where we are looking at all the products which are needed to ultimately come to vaccines and medicines. And we are also working closely together with the European Environmental Agency, because at the same day that the chemical strategy was communicated, there was also the launch of the 8th Environmental Action Programme, which is looking at what kind of indicators can we develop that we then can follow up to monitor that the situation is improving. So we have indeed a strong interaction with all these agencies, and the vast majority of these agencies are also involved in the working out of all the working groups and action points that are described in the circular economy and in the chemicals strategy.
Clear. Thank you, Erwin. Also, something that it would be very interesting to get your further view on something that you mentioned during the presentation: the safe and sustainable by design criteria. As you know, we are the industry is heavily working on understanding the new packaging waste directive essential requirement, what that will mean to be all the packaging recyclable, reusable by 2030 in an effective way. And you have included this new angle of safe beyond sustainable. So how do you see that new added ingredient in the already complex reality for the industry to apply or to comply with the new review of the essential requirement? Do you think that it will be well embedded in the future essential requirement? Do you think that it will be affected by any mean, or it will be implicit and therefore not need to worry? I mean, how do you see that? You know, because I think the industry is very much focused on how we can transform the packaging fully sustainable, recyclable, and the inclusion of now that safety aspect. It's almost like adding an, of course, it's complying with the existing legislation, of course, but at a certain moment, the new definition of safe and sustainable by design criteria cannot raise the bar in the existing law as well in parallel. So how do you see that?
Well, thanks for the question. I don't have a crystal ball. I clearly don't know what will be the outcome. I only realize how difficult the discussion is, in the sense that we have been looking, and with we, I mean, as well, authorities and industry were looking at sustainability essentially from the classical environmental aspects, the societal aspects, and the economical aspects. Of course, you can interpret environmental as broad as you wish, but it's very clear that we will also have to integrate the reflections on this climate neutrality. Otherwise, the CO2 consumption will have to be taken into consideration. The only thing that I can say at this moment that there has been initial initiatives. The Dutch RIVM has been working on some interesting studies related to that, considering to this. This is also the case for the French ANSES, who has been looking at this on deciding what is more interesting, recycling PVC with DHP or burn it, or what is the best case. It came into the discussion of lead stabilizers in PVC and how to look at it. So it's clearly taking place. What I have to add to that looking at safe and sustainable by design will require from industry to look more than ever before also what is expected to happen with substances in the waste phase and what could hamper the recycling, be it mechanical, be it chemical, but what do we need to look at the end of life in order to go from the linear to the circular economy?
Clear. Thank you, Erwin. Really interesting. We have a question from the audience. So Ronald.
Yeah, it's a question to Erwin. Can you please elaborate more on the EU CLF?
So this EU CLF, European Chemicals Legislation Finder, is an idea that has been picked up by the Commission originally to inform small and medium-sized enterprises in an easy, straightforward and free way to know what are the different legislations in place in the European Union and what do they need to know to be compliant with all the different legislations, going from REACH over CLP, going to toys, the ROS directive, the end of life of vehicles, all this kind of legislations. So we have been taking up, or we got indeed the mandate from the Commission to work this out, to make this available. We are now working at a second version in which we will go further with some additional legislations that we want to integrate into that. And in view of the circular economy, we believe as well that EuCLEF has a major advantage for non-EU companies, be them small or big, to really know and to understand what is needed to be compliant in the European Union. What you also have to know that is simultaneously the Commission has been launching certain activities to introduce new tariff codes, which will allow at customs inspections to verify whether substances are entering the European market in articles that we don't like. And hence there we are indeed also looking at the global aspects which are both mentioned in the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability and the Circular Economy Action Plan, that Europe is clearly not an isolated island. We are confronted with a lot of import from other parts of the world, and in order to make circular economy work, we must guarantee that what we don't want to have in European manufactured goods are not entering in imported goods, and that's where EuCLEF can help.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Erwin. I think we have another question, so a couple of minutes before we go into the next presentation. So, Ronald.
Yeah, there's still one other question, and that relates to the challenges which are there and the goals related to 2025 and 2030 and 2050, and the time it normally takes to get new regulations in place. How do you look at that, Erwin, from an ECHA perspective?
Well, first of all, we are not writing legislation. Let's make that very clearly. As an agency, we are implementing what the Commission is proposing and which is then going through the co-decision procedure with the Council and the European Parliament. Of course, if they contact us for help and advice, because we have, of course, a vast experience in all these activities we are contributing, it's very clear that for those having read the chemical strategy and for those not having read it, I can only recommend to do it as soon as possible. They clearly refer to the third REACH review, which is expected for 2022, and where you read in the chemical strategy that there are clearly things that should be changed in the legislation, meaning in the REACH review we can expect proposals that will come of what has to be changed, and then we will go through the classical period in which this is written out and is presented to the Parliament and Council for ultimate decision making. So it will take indeed some time. It's some years, but it's very clear that this Commission is extremely ambitious and is willing to end as much as possible they can do in their 5 years mandate.
Thank you, Erwin. Super interesting, but we need to keep moving. So thank you, Ronald, as well. So I will give the floor to our last but not least panelist, so Gerard Haagh, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juan-Manuel. Thank you, organizers, for giving me the opportunity to present to you briefly the food contact regulations in the EU and the position of recycled plastics therein. Next slide, please. Before doing that, allow me to briefly introduce Triskelion. You may not be familiar with it. It's an independent company. We were born out of the Dutch TNO Institute, the National Research Institute, about 10 years ago. We're about 100 people, and our mission is to contribute to safe and responsible products for humans, animals, and the environment. And we do that by offering testing and consultancy to the pharmaceutical, food, feed, and agrochemical industries. Within the company, we have a food contact materials team that aims to help producers of food contact materials and articles to comply with the food contact regulations. And we do that by offering migration testing, compliance evaluation, NIA screenings, and petitioning for food contact materials and articles. Next, please. Before I dive into the regulations, let me just clarify basically what from a regulatory perspective is inside a food contact materials. There's a clear distinction between intentionally added substances. Those are the ones that are basically in your recipe or your bill of materials, and those are subject to regulatory requirements. But there are also what are called non-intentionally added substances, referred to as by its acronym NIAS, which are basically impurities, decomposition products, contaminants. Particularly, they can play a role in recycling materials. And you don't know upfront. You don't always know which substances are in there because of the sheer nature. A few remarks on those. The intentionally added substances, well, for those, if these are CMR, carcinogenic, mutagenic, or reprotoxic, or in nanoform, they are basically showstoppers for food contact materials. The NIASes, the non-intentionally added substances, although you don't always know what they are and how many they are, you cannot not just ignore them. You cannot say, I do not know, so I don't have to care. You have to care. And once a substance is introduced, for instance, by one of your suppliers intentionally into a product that you buy and put in your material, it cannot become a NIAS for you. If you think, well, my supplier put it in, but that was not my intention, well, it's too bad. You cannot just change and ignore it. So you have to deal with it. Next slide, please. The food contact regulations in Europe basically start with what is called the framework regulation. You see the number down there. And that basically says that materials and articles that are intended to come into contact directly or indirectly with food, and indirectly basically also covers stuff that is not in contact with food itself, but for instance the labels on the outside of packaging, the printing ink, the adhesive, they're also covered by this regulation. These materials and articles shall be produced according to good manufacturing practice to secure the purity suitable for its intended use, and they should not transfer constituents to food in quantities that could endanger human health. Be clear, this does not mean that it does not allow any transfer of constituents at all. So let's say some limited transfer is permitted. Zero in this sense does not exist, but it should not endanger human health. It should not change the composition of the food, and it should not change the organoleptic characteristics of the food. So the taste, smell, and color of the food. In short, the shortest summary of this regulation is your product must be safe. Next slide, please. Because for plastics, there's a separate regulation. It's a harmonized regulation throughout the EU. That's not the case for a lot of other classes of materials, but for plastics there is. And the shortest summary is that the monomers and additives that you use for your plastics must be listed on a positive list. That's in there, and restrictions may apply. You have to take those into account. If you have polymer production aids, solvents, and colorants. Those are basically subject to national law. The H2 polymerization, so that's the initiators, terminators, crosslinkers, etc., and the niaces. For those, you will have to demonstrate safety, and there's procedures for that. Particularly for final products, there are migration testing requirements that you have to meet, and manufacturers of food contact materials and articles have to provide declarations of compliance to their customers, making clear that they do comply with the regulations. And again, all food contact materials must be produced on a good manufacturing practices. There's a regulation for that, which is very generic, very general, but organizations like Plastics Europe and others provide good guidance documents on how to deal with that. Next slide, please. When it comes down to recycled plastics in food contact materials, basically the regulators make a distinction between two types: the mechanically recycled plastics and the chemically recycled plastics. To start with the latter ones, chemically recycled plastics are where you basically depolymerize back to almost a monomer level. They are basically treated the same way as virgin plastics. They have to comply with the plastics regulations that I just mentioned. And are treated likewise. And this regulation, by the way, also covers offcuts and scrap during production, and recycled plastics that are behind the functional barrier. And the functional barrier is basically a material barrier that prevents any migration of substances to the food. So that situation is pretty clear. For mechanically recycled plastics, there is a separate regulation originating from 2008, and basically it's stated as amending the GMP, the Good Manufacturing Practice Regulation. So it basically it's concerned with how to deal with contaminants, and it states that you can only use mechanically recycling from an authorized recycling process, and I'll come to that in a minute. The input for the recycling must originate from food contact plastics. You cannot put in just any post-consumer plastic waste, and you have to make sure that the contaminants are under control. And basically, there's two ways to do that. Either you have a closed loop system where you keep out contaminants as much as possible, or you prove effectiveness in removing any contaminants that may be introduced during the recycling process. Next slide, please. So how do the contaminants, well, you don't know what's in there. There's techniques analytical techniques to analyze those. And if you do that, and usually these are chromatographic techniques, you will always find a lot of peaks, and that is known as the forest of peaks. And you can get lost in the forest, but there's ways out of that, and we can help you with that. And the trick is basically to make a smart selection of the peaks that are relevant, and ignore, just not ignore, make sure that you don't take into account the ones that you know upfront are not relevant. And on the relevant ones, you apply what's called safety evaluation. So you look at hazard and exposure, and from that you assess and try to determine whether it does not harm human health. Next slide, please. Well, how do you get your mechanical recycling process authorized? There's a number of steps. It starts with submitting a dossier to Efsa, the European Food Safety Agency. They will assess your dossier and publish an opinion on that. And the European Commission is to authorize all recycling processes that have favorable opinions. And once that is done, only authorized processes are allowed. However, the current situation is that I think more than 140 favorable opinions have been published by Efsa. Most of them are on recycled PET, some polyolefins, but the authorization by the EC is pending. It has not passed yet. And well, there's already an amendment to the regulation announced for a couple of years. We haven't seen it yet. It's probably due this year. And I think the discussion in the in Efsa and the Commission is on how to deal with the transition regime. What do you do? What are you going to do with new dossiers and opinions, and how to deal with non-PET recycled materials? And on top of that, there's a broader discussion going on how the entire food contact legislation in the EU will proceed. And that basically means that the regulatory situation at the moment for mechanically recycled plastics is unclear. It's been described as regulatory no man's land. And I think the official answer is, how should I deal with this, is, well, you have to revert to national law, whatever that may mean or be. Next slide, please. That brings me to current trends and outlook as we see it from our perspective at trying to help customers dealing with this. From a regulatory perspective, the general trend is that this is not surprising, that there will be more and stricter limitations on substances to be used in food contact materials. I think the next one on the scrutiny is already on the scrutiny is styrene. And the 16th amendment, so the update on the plastics regulation, has been announced and is expected soon. The said that the entire food contact legislation in Europe is under discussion, and I think basically the two options are: should it be revised, let's say updated, but the main framework being left intact, or should it be completely renewed? And I think the EC recently announced a public consultation round for this. And as regard to mechanical plastics recycling, we are waiting for the next steps by the EC, basically the authorization that has been announced for this year. Well, we'll see what happens. There is, from the market side, a clear call for clarity among not only industry, but also other stakeholders. NGOs are also asking for clarity. In the meantime, what you do see is, as long as recycling processes are not formally authorized, that manufacturers refer to EFSA opinions on their processes in the declarations of compliance, well, which is a legal obligation anyway, but they hope that their customers basically will accept that in the current uncertain situation. We also see that manufacturers are moving from mechanical to chemical recycling to circumvent the unclarity with respect to mechanical recycling. And at last we see a increasing demand for NIOS screening and evaluation among manufacturers, but also driven by consumers and by OEMs. Because as said, what you don't know is inside does not mean that you can simply ignore it. So I think that is a positive trend. And with that, I would like to complete my contribution.
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you very much. Really comprehensive review of the current situation and the complexity of it as well. I would like to go to the poll before we start with the questions. And so voila. So this is a question that you propose for the audience with the different answers. And in the meantime, I have just one question for you. So is there any standardized approach in assessing this non-intentionally added substance, such as contaminant in recycling that you mentioned before? So if you can develop a little bit more on that. You are on mute. Yeah.
Sorry, Juan-Manuel.
Yeah.
There is not. Thank you for the question. It's a very valid one. No, there is not a standardized approach. The regulation does say that you have to take care of your NIOSes. It does not particularly say how. There are some good guidance documents, however, by various organizations. I think the most comprehensive one is the one by EuPC. That is seen as a kind of reference. It's pretty elaborate. I think the challenge is to come to a, let's say, smart, pragmatic way of working, because it's simply undoable and way too expensive to assess every single NIOS molecule, so to speak, that you will find in your material.
Okay, good. And also after Brexit, what is the regulatory situation of food contact plastics in the UK? I mean, it's in a very brief way. Can you give us a little bit of an overview on that as well, while we keep having the answers from the poll?
Yes, I can. That's an interesting one. Basically, UK copied the European food contact legislation, let's say the status of 31st December of 2020, copied that into their own legislation. And I do think that they do have some legislation on recycling as well. But it's interesting to see how that will evolve, because, well, as I said, the new EU, the 16th Amendment will be coming up. Well, it's interesting to see how the UK will develop in that sense. But I expect sooner or later, and probably sooner, it will diverge from the European legislation. I don't expect the UK just to copy all amendments put forward by the EU, but we'll see. Okay, good. Fair enough. We have here the answers from the poll. You can see here that there is in an order, basically. The majority thinks that the option A would be what would they do? So what is your view on this result, basically? Well, let's see. I'm glad to see that answer D did not get any vote. That's a good sign. Yes, submitting a dossier for EFSA. EFSA will still evaluate those, and they cannot simply ignore it or put it aside. So yes, I understand this, but let's say that the timeline on when such process will eventually get authorized is unclear, and particularly when you're dealing with recycling of non-PET materials. We have a hard time working with our customers to find a good strategy for that. And well, I said before, let's hope for more clarity from the regulatory perspective.
Okay, clear. Okay, so thank you very much. I think we have some questions from the audience. So Ronald, the floor is yours.
Yes, there was also in reference to what you just addressed, Gerard. Are there any polyolefins that are also already having a positive opinion?
Yes, from top of my head, there are, I think, a few for HDPE, and I think also for PP in a closed loop system, but by far the majority is PET.
Okay, and another question from the audience is dissolution technology going to help food contact mechanical recycling?
Sorry, what technology is going to help?
Dissolution technology.
Dissolution technology. I'm not fully clear on what is meant then by dissolution technology. If it means indeed, if it's some kind of depolymerization technology, going back to.
No, the dissolution technology is not a depolymerization technology. Okay. It's a technology where the plastic or the polymer is being dissoluted from the other compounds in the matrix, so that it is.
Let's say if that helps to decontaminate the recyclate, yes, for sure, that's going to help. But again, the key of the recycled plastics regulation is that you have to prove basically effectiveness in getting rid of contaminants to an acceptable level. So if this dissolution process is helping with that, then sure, that's a way to go, I think.
Okay, but you will always have to do testing on those materials then on the polymers itself.
Yes, let's say to the shortest summary of the regulation is one, it has to be safe, and two, it's up to you, manufacturer, to prove it.
Yeah, okay. And there's another question that relates to are mechanically recycled food contact approved recycled plastics more available in other geographies? Do you know that?
More available? I don't know what about availability.
Maybe also in reference to legislations there, that they are less strict or something, or?
I can comment on that. For instance, the FDA, so the United States FDA regulation, FDA does not make a distinction between recycled plastics and virgin plastics. So it's just one regulation. They say, well, you have to demonstrate suitable purity. Basically, it's the same. You have to demonstrate that your material is safe. However, you can, it's not obligatory, but you can ask FDA to have a, let's say, look at your process or your material and ask their opinion. And they do publish that opinion. It's not entirely the same as the Efsa opinion, but they do publish that on their website. And that, I think that's often used for customer assurance purposes. It does not necessarily mean that it's easier in the United States to get an approved recycled plastic material.
Okay, thank you. There are some more questions, but maybe in terms of time, I don't know, Juan-Manuel.
Yeah, I think we can we are good on time. So if you have more questions, go ahead.
Okay. So there is also a question that is asking for, is there a clear definition of a functional barrier? And if not, does its functionality have to be demonstrated by migration testing, etc.?
Yes, in the end, it has to be demonstrated by migration test. Let's say there's a few, well, let's say metal layers in general, if they don't have any punctures or holes in them, are accepted as functional barriers. But basically, you have to demonstrate there's no migration, or let's say migration below very low limits, PPB level, for a barrier to be called a functional barrier. But there's no strict definition of that in the legislation.
Okay. And has any mechanical route been authorized yet? I think, yeah, because mention was made, only favorable opinions were listed.
No, so the authorization process is still pending. Basically, the intention is that the EC will authorize all these, well, no, most of these opinions in one go, but that step hasn't been taken yet by the EC. So all opinions dating from, I think the first one are from 2009, they're still waiting for the authorization step.
All right. So including the PET then also?
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing is formally authorized in that sense. Right. Yet.
And maybe one last question, Juan-Manuel?
Yeah, I mean, we are eating now kind of the time of the group discussion, but I think we are good on giving that last question that we can introduce already.
It's maybe more a statement than it is a question. So should we go with PCR material for non-food packaging only?
Well, I have an interest in food contact material, so I would say no. But that is basically that's a business decision. I think everyone has to make that one individually, but let's say within the company. I cannot decide on that.
Yeah, and maybe also in the light of that, of course, there are a lot of developments now going on to look what is possible there with a lot of different new techniques to see how you can get good and safe material that can be mechanically recycled. Yeah. Okay.
Good. Thank you very much. And we now go into the panel group discussion. So we open the floor as well for the audience to bring questions to the three panelists. I would like to start by asking you three, what is the main missing block for you for the circularity of plastics? Where if you have to choose one missing block or one part that is falling behind in this journey, what would be for you? So Sylvia, if you want, we can start.
Yes, well, from my, let's say, outlook, from my point of view, definitely I would like to see more member states active, so national public authorities to be really following, implementing and enforcing EU regulation. That's definitely the first part, and well, this is the first actor that I would like to see, followed by, in particular, when I'm thinking of packaging, by extended producer responsibility schemes, and also have them be more at the forefront of the overall discussion, also when it comes to the consequences of the management of waste.
Thank you. And Erwin?
One of the key questions will be what will be the timing that we need to come to non-toxic cycles, and what can be done. It's very clear. Or we have to, how should I say, if you want to start with non-toxic cycles immediately, then forget about mechanical recycling for long years. If you go and want to solve that problem by what the Dutch authorities kindly call let's go and dilute and diminish the level, then you have to look at what socioeconomic considerations will we make in order to decide what is an acceptable timeline, knowing that for, let's say, food contact materials, the lifetime of the plastic packaging is relatively short. If I look at, for instance, PVC windows in constructions, we are talking about easily 40 years. So there we will see a whole discussion, because there you feel that also the different partners in the discussions have quite some different ideas on how to get there, and which is not always a scientific discussion, but which is, let's say, a rather emotional discussion which is taking place. But that will be one of the many key issues that will be important to progress towards circular economy.
Very interesting, Erwin. Thank you. And Gerard, for you, the missing block.
Yeah, I won't mention the unclarity with respect to recycled plastics in food contact materials anymore. I think what we could use is more harmonization and alignment. So far in food contact materials, plastics are harmonized. A lot of material categories are not yet, so we have to still refer to national legislation. But on top of that, and I see steps are being taken in that direction, is alignment between the various legislations in Europe. So REACH, CLP, biocides, food contact materials, because I wouldn't say these are conflicting, but well, they're not always fully aligned. Let's put it that way.
Yep, clear. So more harmonizations clearly will benefit from accelerating the path of the implementation at the national level. So that is also very interesting. Also, what would be for you the main, and we go now into the other side of the equation. So amongst the whole complexity of the complex regulations, regulatory landscape on the packaging sustainability and plastics, what is the key, whether it's regulation or aspect that you consider the main unlocker? So one of the winners that will, if we do it well, will certainly accelerate the circularity of plastic. So it's kind of complementary to the previous questions. On the one hand is about what is missing, and here is about what do we have in place, but we need to make sure that aspect we do it well if we really want to make this successful story, basically. To Sylvia.
Okay, yeah. Yes, I will reply. This is the €1 million question. It's difficult to find one solution, one block. I think definitely, let's say, to be abstract, harmonization, definitely it's the most important if I look from a European single market perspective. And then if I have to go more into detail, I would say working on collection and sorting. That's definitely key. And have it, of course, harmonized when it comes even to the same color of beans and also what it's collected, and it's somehow similar. But this, of course, entails checking what it's put in the market in the first place. So I would say this for good recyclates and good recycling streams.
Clear. Erwin, from your side?
For me, the most important point of discussion will be safe and sustainable by design. What do we really understand by this? This is, for me, the absolute key question.
Perfect. And Gerard?
Well, I think just putting things in a wider perspective, I've once read a news article where the author said that Europe may develop into a regulatory superpower. We may be losing on other grounds, but in this respect, and you do see that regulations in Europe, REACH, food contact regulations, are basically being copied in some cases by other countries. So we might set the trend here, and that makes life easier for companies exporting to other parts of the world. So if Europe manages to set the pace and set the example here, European companies might profit from that by when exporting to other parts of the world.
Yep, perfect. Great, thank you. I mean, very, very valuable and good insights. And I just want to ask Ronald if there is any question from the audience that we want to share.
Yeah, there was still one leftover question, and it's addressed to Erwin. And what are the expected regulatory developments related to mass balance approaches?
Thanks for the difficult question. I think it's rather early to discuss at this moment. As I said, there is some work ongoing, or that started, on circular economy and what is really meant with what has been written into it. In the circular economy, in the chemical strategy for sustainability, there are 11 working groups that just started 2 weeks ago, or will start within the coming 2 weeks, to work all these activities out. So it's rather difficult to forecast what will coming out. Mass balances will play an important role, that's very sure. But I think what has been mentioned as well, how to look at NIAS, which is something which is an extremely important point, and where in the agency we are now working on a restriction for diapers, which is fully related to that. That's where you see that indeed the classical mass balances that we have been looking at in the past have to be changed and have to be adapted to take care of these products, and also to a certain extent to the degradation products, some of them more known than others. So really too early to come up with a decent answer from my side.
Super and quite fair to you. Any other question, Ronald?
No, from the audience, there are no other questions.
Okay, we have just 2 minutes left. I would like to give the opportunity to the panelists if you want to make a final remark before we close the session. I think we have covered very, very interesting and important topics, and from harmonization in the regulations, or the need of food contact material, the challenge of chemical versus mechanical recycling, and the very, very interesting concept from Erwin about the safe and sustainable by design criteria and challenge in the future if we want to have saved circularity of plastics. But beyond the topics, if there is any remark that you want to make now this time, so Sylvia, any last comment?
Yes, well, I thought that the question on the mass balance was for me. So what I can say, the way I see it, is that indeed it seems that it's going to be the direction that it takes. It's too early to say exactly in which terms, but I feel by looking at the new requirements for recycled content, this is definitely one of the way of reading and interpreting the recycled content mandatory requirements. And in general, yes, indeed, probably it's the need for regulation. So regulation, So instead of directives, which tends to be implemented differently by member states. So somehow mirroring what Gerard said, so the regulation, so the REACH was a good example. So maybe in other sector, regulation as a legal instrument can be a good way to have one harmonized way of reading things.
Thank you. Thank you. Very useful. And Erwin, any final thoughts as well?
Yeah. Following rather closely the circular economy action plan, the chemical strategy for sustainability, and the farm to fork strategy, there is one thing which is coming back in all three, and that's globalization, where Europe is indeed where the European Union is indeed paying more and more attention that we not only have to regulate in the European Union, but that we have to spread our ideas as well to the rest of the world.
Clear. Thank you. Super useful. And Gerard?
Yes, one comment. Regulatory development may sometimes seem very slow, and is maybe even very slow, but many times it also comes sooner than expected. So be prepared. And I think particularly with regard to food contact materials, there's a lot of initiatives going on right now. So things will change for sure, as I think not in not too long time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A promising future there. Okay, thank you once again for the participation. So I think it has been a very, very interesting discussions in one of the key topics of concern for the packaging industry today. And I give the floor to Ronald to close the session. So Ronald, back to you. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan-Manuel, for moderating this session, and also thank you, speakers, for your explanation of the situation at this moment in regulations. It's challenging, as we have seen, and still a lot is in development. Also, of course, following everything that is happening in the circular plastics world. So how are we going to continue this session? Well, first, I would like to address you to the connection options which are within the network app. Yeah, you can search for interesting connections, but what you also can do is that you go to the network platform. You can raise questions there, so you can stay connected to each other in this network app over the whole length of the conference, so till the end of the 20th of May. So you can make chat appointments and whatever you want. So that's also the reason why we set this up in relation to this conference. And in relation to this session, yeah, you can meet the speakers. So when we end this session, and there we have 6 virtual rooms, and in relation to this session, those are rooms 4, 5, and 6. Sylvia will not be able to join this session, and also Juan-Manuel will not be present there. But yeah, the rest is, and you can have good discussions of what has been told, or we can also address new questions, of course, there. Yeah. And then so you can see this in the app. It's on the program. There you can select the rooms where you would like to go to. Yeah. And then in relation to the program itself, so we are now the 25th of February, And the next session will be on the 18th of March. There we'll have two sessions, design for recycling session, and a session on sorting and characterization. And we have the outlook to this sessions. So the design for recycling sessions, there we'll have Gerard Haagh. He was also a keynote speaker. So he's from Amcor. Toon van Harmelen, he's a senior researcher from TNO. With a lot of experience in this field. We have Clemens Puis from Prezero, and we have Thor Tummers, who is working for Unilever in external affairs. So they will address this topic, and in relation to sorting and characterization, we will have speakers Dana Monsora from CFlex, and Lucy van Keulen. She is working as commercial director at Human Corp. It's a relatively new company, having typical very new sorting technologies. We have Olfert Toden van Velzen from Wageningen University, who has been working in this field for many years. And we have Martin Bender from HTP Engineering. It's a firm that is building turnkey sorting lines. So that is the follow-up of this conference. So you can now go to the network app and try to network, and you can also meet the speakers. So thank you very much for your attention, and we hope to see you in one of the rooms, and else in one of the other sessions which are coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.